slot here, and next up to talk about our next topic is good friend of the Battlefields Foundation, tour guide for this weekend of tours, Mr. Scott Patchan. Scott is the author of numerous books, articles, and more recently he published a book about George Washington during the French and Indian War through History Press. But he's published works on the Third Battle of Winchester, the period in which we're talking about, Shenandoah Summer, the summer of 1864. He's assisted the Battlefields Foundation with a lot of its interpretation here recently, especially in the past of the Third Winchester, but a lot of the interpretive signs were placing a lot of like the Piedmont battlefields. Scott has worked with us to write those up because he also wrote the book on Piedmont. But today Scott will be talking about Chambersburg to Moorefield, and Scott, I'll hand it over to you.
The afternoon of July 28th of 1864, about 10 miles west of Martinsburg, West Virginia, near the B&O Railroad Depot at North Mountain Station, Brigadier General John C. McCausland received orders from Jubal Early. When he opened them up, he recalled, I read them and I fell out of the saddle. The orders were, burn Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, burn the entire city to the ground in retaliation for the burnings that had occurred in the Shenandoah Valley under the command of this man, who we've already seen a couple of times this morning. To try and figure out how to put a smile on that face. That would be a great one to have him and Jewel Early side by side up there smiling. Well, we were covering yesterday's action at Cool Spring and Snicker's Gap. There's a side light going on in the Shenandoah Valley at that time while the fighting is going on this 18th and 19th of July. And that is David Hunter. David Hunter gets accused of burning probably a heck of a lot more structures than what he actually did. But what David Hunter did is when he burned a home, it was generally for one of two reasons. Early on, it was because some bushwhackers shot one of his wagon guards, or a straggler, or something like that, on that property. It happens a handful of times from Winchester to the Battle of Piedmont. What he really does is when he gets to Lexington, Virginia, on his way to Lynchburg, he burns the home of Virginia Governor Letcher. And he does that under the pretense that he had found some handbills from Letcher, urging the people of the countryside to rise up and take arms and resist Hunter's advance however they could. As he moves farther south towards Lynchburg, he also burns in Botetourt County near the town of Buchanan, the Anderson family. Who were they? They owned Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond. Now, when he's back up in the northern Shenandoah Valley during the Cool Spring time frame, he is going to order the burning of several homes of prominent Virginians. They include Edmund Lee, whose daughter Helen stayed in the burning home playing the piano until they were able to finally pull her out of there at the last possible moment. Alexander Boteler, famous Virginia politician, wrote official reports for Stonewall Jackson, as well as Andrew Hunter, a distant cousin of David Hunter. So those three homes in particular got in underneath Jubal Early's, and they greatly bothered him. He was tired of seeing this type of warfare, and he decided that it was time for the North to experience firsthand just what it was like to have these civilian homes destroyed on their own turf. Now, previously, when John McCausland gets that order, he later recalled, he said, I myself preferred the way of General Lee. And General Lee in 1863, during the Gettysburg campaign, had just camped just on the outskirts of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. And he issued specific orders to his men that we are not here to destroy. And if we lower ourselves to the same standards as his enemy, then we will be lower than them. And so he issues orders forbidding the destruction of private property there in Pennsylvania. And that's what McCausland meant when he said he preferred the example of General Lee. But McCausland went on to say, but nevertheless, I could see some justice in it. And he said, after all, basically summed it up that I was just following orders. And there's no doubt about that, because Jubal Early in his memoirs would say, I and I alone am responsible for the burning of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. John McCausland was born in Missouri, son of a Virginia family. At a young age, first one of his parents, then the other passed away, and he would return to what's now West Virginia to be raised by extended family in that region. He would go on and he would attend Virginia Military Institute there. When the Civil War breaks out, he's going to become a colonel in the 36th Virginia Infantry, and that unit's path is not going to be with the Army of Northern Virginia and the illustrious history that we know of it, but it's going to start off at Fort Donelson. He'll be amongst the troops that would break out and escape before it's surrendered. And then he would primarily participate in campaigns in Southwest Virginia and what's now West Virginia. So McCausland, like so many of the men in John Breckinridge's Department of Western or Southwest Virginia, and George Crook's Army of West Virginia, most of these men had spent their war relatively uneventful until the spring of 1864. By that time, McCausland is the senior colonel of a brigade, and he will find himself opposing the reign of George Crook on the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad near Dublin, Virginia. He would lead this brigade under the command of General Albert Gallatin Jenkins, who would be mortally wounded in battle at Cloyd's Mountain on May 9th of 1864. Jenkins commanded a relatively large cavalry brigade. That brigade was given to McCausland, and McCausland was promoted to brigadier general. Now, a lot of these cavalrymen, horsemen, they weren't too sure about the prospect of going to war serving under a foot soldier there who had no cavalry experience. However, John McCausland, we talked some about Lynchburg and the campaign for Lynchburg, but one of the primary reasons why Hunter was delayed were the delaying tactics of John McCausland all the way through the Shenandoah Valley, the peaks of Otter, to the very outskirts of Lynchburg, by this man and his brigade slowing Hunter's advance. So much so that staff officer who complained at having to serve under the command of an infantryman later wrote home to his newlywed wife and said, "I give up. Tiger John is a trump," and the men loved him. He's also, you take a look at those eyes staring at you, he's a very serious man. You know he means business. 1890s, he was on a riverboat on the Ohio River. He lived in northern West Virginia after the war. And there were some Union veterans on that boat, and they looking over the rail as the boat's cruising along the Ohio River, and they kind of in hushed whispers. They say, "Is that John McCausland over there?" It's kind of like it was some kind of ghost or something. But his reputation would live on with him. So McCausland would have nearly 3,000 men that he's going to be entrusted with to lead this raid into Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. One of the things we'll talk about is some of the specifics of the orders. The people of Chambersburg are going to have the option to pay $100,000 of gold or $500,000 in United States greenbacks, dollar bills, and buy their way out of having their town burned. That would have been some more money than Jubal Early would have had in his pocket, and you'd be wondering what he did with it. So when he gets these orders, his troops are patrolling out here out here in Martinsburg, up here in this area of Edgesville and in Ferry, along the Shenandoah Railroad. And it's a little side story there. It's a story that officer, Achilles Times, the captain who was at Tiger John's the Trump, he's out on patrol in that area, and he's talking to his colonel sitting on their horses. Suddenly, these two beautiful young women ride by and blow kisses and start waving. Tynes, and by the way, Tynes is telling this story as he writes it to his wife. So he blows her at his back, and he tells the colonel, he says, "Colonel, you better knock me off my horse." And the colonel declined, and so Tynes went over and starts talking to them. But as he wrote to his wife, he says, you know, such things are a great temptation to a newly married man. But I think of Hattie's his wife, and all is well. These men are at war, but they're still young men. So they will get, McCausland will have in his force here in Edgesville, his brigade and the brigade of Brigadier General Bradley Johnson with 2 battalions of Marylanders. These are very strong brigades, about 1,500 each. A lot of these valley brigades only have 600-700 men in them. But they are going to head north at McCoy's Ferry. Across there, Harry Gilmore with the 2nd Maryland Battalion. This Harry Gilmore would later become chief of police of the city of Baltimore. He will be the spark plug that drives off the Union covering force. Now, what's the Union doing at this point in time as McCausland is getting ready to launch his raid? Oh, and by the way, it's important to note that while this is going on here, Jubal Early is launching covering actions here. John Vaughn's cavalry brigade will actually cross the river at Williamsport and move towards Hagerstown. A couple infantry brigades will cross at various points. Down here in the vicinity of Point of Rocks, Mosby's men are threatened going across. And up here off the map, or over here at Old Town, McNeil's Rangers would cross over there. That's a very wide front. And Jubal Early's got his whole army, even the units that aren't crossing the river, threatening to cross. So if you think about this, on the 29th of July, 17 days before this, Early was sitting in front of Washington, D.C. The primary thing that the Union troops now are going to be focused on is, we've got to protect Washington and Baltimore. You know, they're thinking of the last campaign instead of what's going on currently. So that's what they're seeing as their primary objective. When we recall that Crook's army, the main force out here, is going to be charged with the initial defenses of this region. So Crook, when he crosses the Potomac River on the 25th and 26th from Martinsburg, he's going to lead some thin cavalry screen covering various crossings, but his force is going to move back into the mountains and cover the gaps so that Jubal Early can take his army and move east and threaten Washington and Baltimore. But as we know, that's not what Jubal Early has in mind. So McCausland, relatively easily, is going to be able to punch through the Union defensive line here at McCoy's Ferry. There will be skirmishing with elements of Averill's brigade all the way up into Pennsylvania. So what's going on with William Woods Averill, the primary Union general who will be conducting operations against McCausland? Averill's, one of the things is to think about with this mounted command. These men and these horses had been part of that arduous retreat through West Virginia from Lynchburg. They're still recovering from that. They had a rough time and were put in a horrible position at the Second Battle of Kernstown and were routed off the battlefield by 4 times their number in a chaotic retreat through Winchester and on to Bunker Hill, West Virginia after that battle. Men are tired, the horses are worn, and Averill's struggling to find enough horses to mount this command. as they fall back in, he's not really sure, and you've got to keep in mind that if you're April, all of his actions need to be weighed against what he knows. He's got scouts out, but he does not know exactly where McCausland is going. McCausland is going to advance northward, up here through Mercersburg, and then early in the morning, go through St. Thomas, and then early in the morning, he's going to arrive at Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Averill at this point, by this time, is encamped 9 miles south of Chambersburg at Greencastle, Pennsylvania. The last telegraph from the department commander, who was Darius Couch, who's up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, had come through at 3 p.m. morning trying to get in touch with Averill. They can't find him. A man named Thomas Bard, he was the telegraph operator in Chambersburg, tries to take the last message. You realize they keep sending messengers out to Averill and they're not getting any response. So at about midnight, he arrives down at Greencastle at the Thomas Fleming farm, and it was kind of hard to find Averill. He's worn out, tired from all the campaigning, and he's fallen asleep over in a corner of the farmyard. And Bard will locate him and they'll rouse him, and they'll say a very groggy Averill replied, "Tell him I'll be there in the morning." So Averill gets his men up in the morning. And again, what happens at Chambersburg is completely unprecedented. But this decision here on the part of Averill is going to allow McCausland not unimpeded access, but nothing substantial. McCausland will be slightly delayed by the actions of First Lieutenant Hancock McLean from Kentucky. He's got 45 men of the 6th United States Cavalry and 1 piece of artillery, and he's resisting McCausland's progress the whole way up. He stays in front of him until very early on the morning of July 30th, when he pulls out of Chambersburg. At about 5 a.m., McCausland will unlimber 1 gun of the Baltimore battery on a hill west of town that was known as the fair, where they would have the annual county fair. That gun would send a missile sailing into the town of Chambersburg, waking many with the crashing explosion. Then he would send patrols through the streets of town to make sure all the Union soldiers, and once they were certain that there were no Yankees lying in wait within the town, he begins to send troops in there. They will arrive in town at 5 a.m. One of the men who is leading this way is Colonel William Peters. He's a former professor from William and Emory College in Southwest Virginia. And when he gets in there, he takes his command of the 21st Virginia Infantry, and McCausland tells him that he's going to be ordered to burn the town. He doesn't like those orders, and he refuses to do that. He says, "By what authority are you doing this?" And McCausland shows Peters the orders, and he refuses. And McCausland will have him placed in arrest, and he will turn to others. Major Harry Gilmore was no shrinking violet, and he readily accepted the task. Now the task would be several hours in coming, because at 5 a.m. he gives the townspeople the opportunity to come up with the ransom amounts. Now if you're these townspeople, what things that you know about Confederate behavior in your territory in the past, such as Jeb Stuart's ride around McClellan in the fall of 1862, and Robert E. Lee's men during the Gettysburg campaign, that they had treated the civilian populace of Pennsylvania very well, and there had never been any significant atrocities committed. So secondly, the townspeople had already, the banks I should say, had already sent their reserves on the train northward the previous day for safekeeping in Harrisburg. So even if they are inclined to come up with the money, the readily available source, the bank vaults, were empty, and the funds were not available. So the townspeople, some people are in a panic, rushing around. Well, how do we raise the money? Others were like, they're just bluffing. They've been here before. They're not going to do this. So he had given them 6 hours till about 11 a.m. on that morning. Before 11 a.m. arrives, though, this bedlam and a lack of discipline is going to occur amongst McCausland's command. Men are going to come into the town, get into liquor, get drunk. They're going to begin harassing civilians. McCausland himself was seen going into a bookstore and carrying out an armful of books to take out for his own personal use there. So there's going to be a great breakdown in discipline. Brigadier General Bradley Johnston wrote that if there was to have been some sort of justice in this retribution, it was certainly lost by this thuggish behavior on the part of the men in the ranks and officers as well. And so he, said that this thing was just reduced to a spectacle that had lost all meaning at that point because of the way. Now McCausland, by the middle of the morning, is gathering that, the folks here are delaying and we are going to just burn the town. Harry Gilmore and his men and another Virginia battalion will go in and start setting the town afire. Other troops will come in as well. Some of the drunken troops would actually go to homes and ransom it. They'd be literally holding flames to the house and demanding money, and in some cases people would pay it and the house would be spared. In other cases they'd pay it and the house would be burned anyway. In the end, 550 buildings are destroyed. Early has more than even the scale for what Hunter had done in the Shenandoah Valley. 2,000 to 3,000, largely men, women, and elderly, are left homeless as a result of this. Now, Achilles Times, he wrote home to his wife and he saw the sight of all these women and children, and he called this the saddest spectacle that he had ever witnessed in his life. Another Virginian from McCausland's brigade noted that these scenes may be exaggerated, but cannot be heightened, the impact of what this was. So there were many men in the Confederate Army who were, just as there would be in the Union Army when Sheridan was burning out the barns and crops in the valley, that were just appalled by this. And most usually those moments come when they saw the impact on the women and the children who were at home struggling to survive. Now, we have to ask our question. Next question here is, these are some pictures. First I want to show you the destruction of what you're looking at here. The greater parts, about 70% of the town is destroyed as a result of this. See, it's just completely devastated. But there will be neighborhoods and sizable portions of the town that were not affected by the fire as well. This is the old courthouse. One story actually says that McCausland ordered troops to take barrels of powder and blow up the courthouse in there. All that's left today on the modern courthouse, they used those pillars were there when they rebuilt the Franklin County courthouse. This all now we need to talk about what happens to our friend General William Woods after all. Where was he? Well, he gets up in the morning and he's got reports from the scouts. And you remember, McCausland, by 11 o'clock or noon, his men are heading west out of the town, heading to McCauslands, the next town to the west. And McCausland, by the time his men are moving northward, he initially is going to veer to the east because of some reports from scouts that the Confederates were reporting leaving the east side of Chambersburg. Those may have been the initial patrols and scouts that McCausland sent through to clear out the town and make sure there was nothing on the eastern side. So Averill starts moving again in that direction. Keep in mind, he's thinking, oh, maybe they're going to Baltimore. So he's trying to hedge his bets. But then he sees the plumes of smoke riding. He also had heard the cannon fire. So by the time Averill arrives in the early afternoon of July 30th, his men are dashing through a burned out town and just seeing this devastating scene of women and children crying. A few men who were in town were begging Averill's men, get off your horses and let us go take care of those town burners. And so it was quite an affecting scene. Averill's going to pursue. He's coming under he will come under a lot of criticism, and there's going to be more questionable actions that will relegate this criticism to be somewhat legitimate. We really never were going to know the full reasons why he would move slowly at times. But Averill was born in Bath, New York, graduate of the West Point. During the Civil War, he starts off as colonel of the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry, who eventually rise to brigade command by the Chancellorsville campaign. He will have a division command of cavalry under him in Stoneman's operations during Chancellorsville. Now, as Averill is often wont to do when he's serving as a player in a large sandbox, i.e. a big army where he has a small piece and he has an assigned role to play, he struggles in carrying out his mission. As a result of that failures during the Chancellorsville campaign, he will be relieved of command. However, later in 1863, he's going to be given command of the Independent Brigade of Mounted Infantry and Cavalry in the Department of West Virginia. And he will do very well in these small unit actions where he has his own brigade and tends to have other brigades with junior officers supporting him. He'll launch some aggressive raids to White Sulphur Springs. He'll wipe out John Eccles in November at the Battle of Droop Mountain. He'll make a raid deep into Salem, Virginia, late in the winter of 1863, tearing up the railroad before heading back into the mountains of West Virginia. He'll make a bold attempt to get to the salt mines and lead mines in southwest Virginia, only to find the way blocked by John Hunt Morgan and Drummond Jones. And he will serve on throughout the Shenandoah campaign. He's going to come under allegations on 2 occasions, and one of these is certainly false. Crook accuses him of being drunk at Kern's Down, and they also said he was sleeping in Greencastle because he had been drinking that much, and that's why nobody could find him when the telegraphs were coming through. Be that as it may, he's going to begin pursuing as rapidly as he can. And I'm going to come back here to my map. So he will make by August 1st, they will be down in Hancock, the Confederates. And this Confederate force through discipline is continuing to break down, and it's probably down to about 2,800 men, mostly from desertions at this point. But there's going to be a war almost breaking out in the streets of Hancock, because some of the Virginians are robbing Marylanders. Hancock has families that have sons serving in the Army of Northern Virginia. Some of them will be in Early's Army in 1864. And so the Maryland battalions under Johnson and Gilmore almost get into a shooting match with some of the Virginians. The only thing that stops it is going to be the approach of Averill on the eastern side of Hancock. And they're going to head out west toward Cumberland. Now, Cumberland, Maryland has the same orders as Chambersburg. Pay a ransom or we're going to burn the town to the ground. But we're going to have an unlikely hero here in Cumberland. Actually, 2 heroes. The first one is the railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And a man who's always kind of served in the backwaters of West Virginia and always seemed to be fairly competent and reliable, Major General Benjamin Franklin Kelly, is going to lead a train with about 600 or 700 men, most of them Ohio National Guardsmen serving for 100 days, and a couple companies of veteran infantry and artillery, and they will entrench on some high ground just east of Cumberland. And they're going to block McCausland in as he comes. There will be an engagement there. Well, if Averill has kept moving along and pursuing quickly, as he had been, they might have really trapped the entire force there in Cumberland. But Averill decides in Hancock that his horses are too tired, he needs to get more horses, rest with those that he has, and he will not move again for 2 more days, until the 3rd of August. So, what is McCausland to do? Well, he's going to head south to this little town of Old Town. Today, it's a unit on the C&O Canal, and there's a bridge over the Potomac River there, and it's a wooden bridge, and if you want to cross that bridge to this day, there's someone working in a toll booth that holds out a little cup, and you put your quarter in it, and they let you cross the bridge over into West Virginia at Greensburg.
That's cool.
So they're going to attempt to cross there, but on this side, but right here, on this side, opposite of Old Town, which is now the Greenspring along the B&O Railroad, you have a stockade fort protecting the railroad there. And you also have Colonel Israel Stowe with about another 100 Ohio 100-day wonders that are out there. And you also have very interesting and unique device that the Union has brought in. You might be interested in this. It's called Captain Petrie's Arbor Train. It consisted of a steam engine, a couple of armored cars that were armored by running railroad rails sideways along the side of the cars, and with a couple of artillery pieces poking out, and had a car for infantrymen to fire between the slats for protection. And so when McCausland arrives here, he's going to be held up for hours at Old Town by these troops. He's going to make several assaults across the river and the canal with his men. Finally, as the afternoon is wearing on, McCausland's going to order the it's actually Major Harry Gilmore, pleads with one of the gunners from the Baltimore Battery to move one of his guns up right up to the edge of the canal, only a couple 100 yards away from that train. And he puts a shot right into the engine of that. Steam comes whistling out, very loud sound. It's going to disconcert everybody there. But this is going to be the turning moment, because then they're going to focus in and they're going to subdue Captain Petrie's armored train. The next is going to be, that's going to be out of action, and those troops are going to flee from the area. All that's left is going to be a detachment of Colonel Stowe's Ohioans and in the blockhouse. They're going to hold out for about 90 minutes. Finally, someone says, hey, let's see if these guys will surrender. They're short-termers. Maybe we can talk them into it. And so Stowe agrees on the condition that you give us an immediate parole and allow us to march out of here with all of our equipment, except our muskets. They did. And so that is how McCausland gets across the Potomac River. But he's not done yet. He's going to continue on with his mission there. So he will move on from there up here to New Creek Station. I don't know, did you guys run out to that area, Kaiser, West Virginia? No. There was an engagement there, and again, it's going to be a railroad engagement. And what he wants to do there is he wants to tear up the facilities, B&O railroad facilities, tracks. I like to pick on railroads, Mark. But once again, Benjamin Franklin Kelly is going to ride the rails down from Cumberland and get on some forts that had been pre-made on the high ground outside of New Creek, and he's going to stop the further advance of McCausland. McCausland's going to fall back southward, and he's going to encamp around Moorefield, West Virginia. So his troops are going to be split by the south branch of the Potomac River. One soldier recalled, we were camped in such a haphazard manner that we all assumed that the enemy was nowhere to be found. Bradley Johnson, the Marylander, his brigade would be camped on the northeast side of the south branch of the Potomac River, and McCausland would be on the south side. This building right here is just north of Moorefield, out north of the river as well. This is called Willow Wall. This is the home to this day where Bradley Johnson will make his headquarters. We'll come back. This home right here, this is the Samuel McMeechan house. It's in downtown Moorefield. There's a distance of about 4 or 5 miles between McCausland's headquarters and Johnson's. So you see right away there's not a lot of concern about anything happening. Most of the men have turned their horses out into the fields loose. You know, let them just, you know, and so that's the situation. Now, we come back, we know that Averill had been moving slow, but on August 3rd, he's going to depart Hancock, and by the afternoon of the 6th of August, he will be in Romney, West Virginia. You know, not too many miles, they're about 27 miles north of Moorefield. Now again, McCausland's at Moorefield thinking that there's no threat nearby. But for all of Averill's shortcomings thus far, his men, the horses are rested, and he's proven his theory here that he can accomplish more with rested men and rested horses than trying to push on with broken down men and broken horses. He sends out scouts on the evening of the 6th. Averill has excellent scouts, and they wear dress as Confederates, and Averill's going to know exactly the dispositions of the Confederate encampments around Moorefield. Now, as he's moving out late at night towards Moorefield, although McCausland's not all that concerned, some of the men, known as McNeil's Rangers, were concerned. McCausland had spurned their advice on better dispositions for encampments and better locations for their encampments. But one of the Rangers, Ranger Maloney, he's going to hide out under a bridge and count the Union cavalry as they're moving out of Romney that evening. He's going to estimate about 2,000 cavalrymen, divided into 3 brigades. He's going to race through a back road along the river to deliver this message to McCausland, who will get it about 2 a.m. Actually, he'll get it around midnight or so, and then Maloney will go to sleep on the front porch of the McMeechan house. McCausland, for his part, is going to send out at 2 a.m. a message to Johnson, telling him that the enemy has been spotted moving through Romney, and said 3 brigades, and tells Johnson simply to have the men saddle their horses and send out a patrol toward Romney. And McCausland, like I said, he figured he had done everything that was needed to take care of the situation. Under ordinary circumstances, he may well have done so. But the officers and underlings of Johnson, when they got this message about saddling your horses and being ready to go in the morning, they just assumed they were making an early start for the Shenandoah Valley. There was no mention of, hey, Averill may attack us in the morning, so the men saddled their horses, those that could find them and retrieve them in the middle of the night darkness, and go back to sleep. Now, Averill, he's got a stealthy operation as he begins to arrive just north of the encampments here, off of this map, that there's a series of picket posts. And he's going to send out officer by the name of Captain Thomas Kerr. This is him right here. And he's going to be leading a contingent of about 60 men, many of them dressed in Confederate uniforms. And they're going to start out riding up to the pickets and say, relief approaching, or something like that, friends, and then they just go start chatting the guys up and then capturing a couple of these small posts. They learned that there's supposed to be some patrols going out and coming in, and so Kerr is going to lead one detachment, around 15 men, on a looping trail around one picket post that they know that's there, and this is like the large one, the picket reserve, come up behind the men with the call patrol going out. And of course, they are, and the lieutenant that was in command of that post was flabbergasted. William Averill himself shows up on the scene and comforts the man and says, man, you have nothing to feel bad about. These are the best scouts in the whole country right here that fooled you on this. And so what has happened is, by these stealth operations, Averill has completely cleared the way to launch an attack directly into Johnston's attack. There's Willow Wall right here. So when he goes forward, leading them is going to be this contingent of men in gray who are just going to kind of sort and mingle in. While we show these Confederate units as like waiting in line of battle, that's really just kind of to show the order of how it appears that the units were encamped along the road. So you're going to have men on either side of them. And when the attack comes, there will already be those Jesse scouts in gray mixed amongst them that will open fire. And Major Gibson, commanding the brigade composed of the 14th PA and 8th Ohio, will storm directly into the midst, quickly overrun and capture the 2 pieces of the Maryland artillery. Johnston's entire brigade will be back in there. This man here, Major Kerr, he's out in front, leading the assault himself. At one point, when he gets to the 8th Virginia, which had a little bit more time to form line and offer resistance, his horse is going to be shot down with 3 bullets. And then he will be caught under that horse. He himself is wounded. He extricates himself, pulls out his sword, charges ahead, and captures the battle flag of the 8th Virginia. Bradley Johnson will barely escape capture going out the back door or the back window of Willow Wall. Some of the Union soldiers actually thought they had him in their possession for a little bit. The 2 sides will push on towards the river, driving Johnston's men back in confusion. Now you see here what's going to happen is McCausland's nowhere near. McCausland's not going to take any part in the combat, which says a lot about him here. When they get down to the river, however, the 22nd Virginia and the 14th Virginia, their respective colonels, they had more warning than what McCausland did from the sound of the attack, and they're going to offer resistance. They will charge headlong into the Ohioans and Pennsylvanians, and there'll be a wild bleed right there in the river. If you're familiar with the area, I think it's the route coming through there, it's right where the bridge is at, where all that activity took place there. Although they had stalled the attack temporarily, Averill feeds more troops into the fight on both flanks, and this stand here at the river will be quickly broken. Many of the men retreating southward toward Moorefield, and others retreating west on the direction of a road that ultimately leads towards Strasburg, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley. These Union troops from West Virginians would attack here. Initially, they will be repelled, and the commander, Major Palmer of the 3rd West Virginia, would be wounded, but they would reorganize attack, and they would overrun Jackson's battery and capture the rest of the guns from McCausland's command. McCausland would lose over 450 men, 400 of them prisoners, the other 50 killed and wounded. Averill loses about 35 men killed and wounded, and another 15 missing or captured. May have been snagged by McNeil's Rangers, hanging off to the rear. After this battle, Averill will get his troops, his prisoners off the field, and McCausland will take the remnants of the command. Again, now this command numbered 3,000 men when it left at the end of July. A week after this, they did a tally of the number of Confederates that were left in all the brigades of the cavalry in the valley. Only 2,000 men were in McCausland's and Johnston's brigades at that point. So a third of the largest cavalry brigades in Early's army have been substantially weakened and demoralized here. Word comes back. Well, let's blame Bradley Johnson for that. He had a couple of shortcomings during the retreat from Washington, and he seems to get the lion's share of the blame here. Jed Hotchkiss described him as being culpably negligent. Hotchkiss went on to say, the only wish is that Johnson had been among those captured at Moorefield. So you know how the high command said, But I just have to say, I personally think that a lot of that probably has to do with a good PR effort on the part of the Virginian McCauslands, because certainly the breakdown in discipline in general was attributed to McCausland, starting at Chambersburg. McCausland's actions did not, when he learned of the direct approach in the middle of the night of April's force from Romney, certainly did not betoken a commander who was alarmed and concerned about a threat to his force. He goes back to sleep, as did Johnston. So, as one author entitled his before, as in this case, there was plenty of blame to go around. But this would be the first in a resurgence of Union cavalry in operations in and around the Shenandoah Valley that would reach its apex on September 19th of 1864, when Phil Sheridan's cavalry would charge down the Valley Pike in his famous charge to end the Battle of Third Winchester. Thank you.
Questions?
Do we know why Crook had stayed?
The question is, why did Crook hold Averill in the state? The reason for that seems to stem from the two men seemed to have gotten along when they were cooperating with each other, and Crook was a slightly senior officer during the Southwest Virginia raid in May. They seem to have been vying for the attention of being the guy for Hunter during the Lynchburg campaign. And Crook notes in his biography that on the way to Lynchburg, apparently they were following April's guidance, and then when they got in a sticky situation, it was Crook who led the way out of the situation there. Crook in his memoirs in regard to that retreat actually proposed, and if we got blocked off out there at Salem, he proposed we were going to march all the way to Knoxville. Anyway, next question.
How long did it take to rebuild Chambersburg, and was it left to the people that could bear all the financial?
You know, I don't have the answer to that question. It would take some years to fully get it back. Some might say it's been up and down. Child? No, Hotchkiss is with Early's headquarters. So the question was Hotchkiss with them? So no, he's not, but he's with Jubal Early's headquarters, and so he's hearing and in on these discussions about how these events are interpreted by the senior leadership.
What happened to Johnson and McCausland after the war?
McCausland would leave the country for a while, as would Jubal Early, and a lot of that probably had to do with the fact that they didn't feel that the paroles given would cover them because of the Chambersburg incident, so they had to wait a while for a few years until they felt that it would be safer.
And Johnson?
Johnson goes back on with life. It's interesting, yeah, he stays on as a brigade commander with the Valley Army throughout the campaign against Sheridan. McCausland's going to mysteriously disappear as a commander, and for a lot of these important battles against Sheridan, the brigade will be under the command of a senior colonel, and never been able to really track down where was McCausland. Had he been temporarily relieved or something? But we don't know. Let's move over to this side.
We lived in Chambersburg for over 30 years. And in fact, the home where we lived, it was reputed that the Confederates camped in our backyard during the 63 D campaign. And
Is that the Messersmith Woods, or they call it?
Ken's Woods.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then in the burning itself, they did spare the Masonic Temple and the Jewish Cemetery. And then I own 2 buildings downtown that was not executed for whatever reason. I have no idea why. But anyway.
Those are some interesting thoughts. Anything in the back? I don't want to miss. because it was the nearest sizable Union town that they felt would make a mark on it. And I'll just close it out by saying, get back to that 1864 election thing. If you're Lincoln, how do you think you're feeling on top of all the casualties from the Overland Campaign? The Confederate Army shows up in front of Washington, D.C. on the 11th and burns a sizable town in Pennsylvania, the border country, down on the 30th to wrap up the bunch. And that's the same day of the disaster at the crater. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. We're going to do a couple minutes breaks here, but I wanted to update you all with where we stand on preserving Union Church. Just at lunch, we peaked over $60,000 raised. So, I mean, that's, give yourself. We're just a little bit over halfway through our goal. And it's super easy to give, and instead of a 5-minute break, I'm gonna give you all a 6-minute break instead, just to get so you can see Kirsten. And if you can't make it to Kirsten in time, you also can text. Everyone's got a phone in here, I hope. It's 53555. And you text that number and you just type in cross keys, all one word, and it gives out the form. It's super, super easy. I did it right here. I'm gonna give $50 right now. I would give more, but I'm getting married in a couple months, so I gotta pay for that. So $50 right there. Let's keep on giving, guys. We're planting a flag across the keys for future generations to begin an experience and investment off of your all's hard-earned money that we love the investment there. So thank you all so much. Come back in about 5 minutes.